So this is mostly to our Yay Fellows before we go to our guest speakers, as well as to our teams. So we can go to the next slide. That we just always like to make sure we go through some logistics with the recognition that teams are moving at different rates on their off time. So make sure everyone is meeting our logistic goals for each week. Sarah, do you want to talk real quickly about the climate action survey? Sarah W.
Yeah, sure thing. So for those that are just joining, if you're from Colorado College or if you've been in the class the past couple of weeks and still haven't taken this survey, we're administering a survey to anyone involved in this network. And we hope to get all the questions in by September 30th. This is asking a lot of questions, mostly about your perceptions of climate action, what lifestyle choices you make in regards to climate action and things like that. So it takes about 15 minutes, give or take. It's a little bit of short answer, a little bit of, arrange different climate issues into priorities of its issues and things like that. So if you have questions about it, feel free to send me a Slack message or you can send me an email. My email is also in the Qualtrics survey, but hope to get some responses from everyone involved in this network so we can better this course content and our lectures for not only this semester, but future years as well. So thank you to those that have already completed this and would really appreciate it if you take about 15 minutes to do it before the 30th of September, which is next Wednesday. Gillian, you ready for me to go next slide?
Yep. Okay, so just again, quick reminder, welcome to Colorado College students. SDG teams, please make sure that you meet with your teams before next Wednesday and have those targets figured out. I see some Slack messages going back and forth. So you may also need to encourage new members on how to use Slack. But let's make sure we get those targets narrowed down. So every SDG team has at least one or more targets that you are going to focus on for this semester. Do be mindful, a couple of these targets will actually cross-link among SDGs, and that's great. So just be mindful that one good example that also was presented today in the General Assembly is on marine plastics. And that actually shows up in several places in different targets. So make sure you look through the targets with some care and some of the information that goes below each target. Okay, the other sort of reminder is that we do need to have everyone assigned to a role and make sure you clarify your time commitments. We're working across multiple universities. Some universities are on quarters, some are on semesters. So just be very respectful that each person has different sets of time commitments to the class as well as to the project as a whole. And then last, we will post that team contract for all team members, and we will have to revisit it as new students come and go. So just be flexible on that, but we need to have that completed by next week. Next slide. And again, just reminded, by last week, you were supposed to have that outline sort of moving along. Make sure you've done that. Clearly define those roles. That helps as students join your team. So really spend some time to think about those roles. And then I noticed today on the SDG Action Zone, I wasn't seeing a lot of action from the Yay project. So do make sure every team has a Twitter account. You will see very quickly that the UN works in the Twitter universe. So you can happily delete this account as soon as you're done with your project if you don't like Twitter. But really to stay on top of a UN and an international conversation, Twitter is still probably the #1 platform for communication. So you need to be engaged in Twitter, and you can follow your SDG on Twitter, follow the SDG goals on Twitter, and see what the new excitement things are. Again, be prepared for new team members to join in. And I think the next is my last slide. So just a little bit of an update. We do think we're pretty much at agreement that we will host our second global virtual conference hosted by the University of Derby. We did this last year with about 120 participants. We expect a lot more this year. So do be mindful, we have this end presentation that all of our teams will present at, as well as the story maps and other things that you're working on. So we'll keep you updated as this develops, but we just are excited to share that it's now a go and it's formally funded. And that I think it's my last slide, so we can turn over to our, oh, go to, I think one last slide on the guest speaker. Yay, there we go. Okay. So we are so excited to welcome our first guest speaker to the Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education, otherwise known as YAY, which is an multi-institutional project funded by the National Science Foundation. Myra is a senior advisor with the Whole Earth Ethics, and as some of you heard who logged in earlier, was one of the main, or was one of the negotiators working on the Rio Plus 20. I still think we were in the same tent at the same time, at least a couple of times at Rio, working on the future we want, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the document leading to the formation of the SDGs that were eventually voted on by the UN General Assembly. So we want to remind you, again, as this class gets larger, that we will use Twitter. Make sure you hashtag the YAY 2020 SDGs hashtag so we can see that. We can also use the chat. But so Sarah, W, and I will try and keep an eye on the chat. So please make sure we have lots of questions from Myra as our speaker. And with no further ado, we will turn it over to you. And thanks again for joining us.
Well, thanks so much. It sounds like that's my cue to get my slides up, everyone, and I will do that. Give me a time frame so that I can watch the clock, Gillian or Sarah.
Our class ends at 2:15 Mountain Time.
All right, and I think I'm slated to go for about 40 minutes. My plan is to meet that commitment and stay in that window. Does that sound right to you?
Sounds good. Let's make sure our students have lots of questions. So keep posting questions as they pop up, and we'll start with the questions at the end. And Sarah reminds us that you can ask questions through the Slack account as well.
All right. Well, let's get started because I am interested in a vigorous conversation. In fact, I have a bit of prompts as we go through this that may generate some questions. There's no question as I look back at May 2019, in fact, I was at CC at the time, as we received word that the official decision had been made that this indeed would be called the Anthropocene, or the how do you say it, Sarah H? Anthropocene, is that how you?
Yeah. I follow you, but a lot of people say Anthropocene.
Yes, and so we are here in this moment, and I do feel the meme "I can't breathe" is resonating in as we fully recognize the human impact at this time as a keystone species, because essentially we meet that definition. But another part of George Floyd's last moments was calling out to Mama, to his mother. And I get chills when I think about that, obviously, because the earth as mother is also what's being summed up in this era that we are living through. This epoch of time, this moment in time, is about our relationship to the earth itself. And if anyone has ever heard me before, I think we've been 50 years plus making sense of seeing the earth from space for the first time. And I think it's just beginning to translate into our awareness in a meaningful way. And so anyhow, couldn't resist bringing that in. I know perhaps some of you will hear more from Sarah on that meme, but I think when we look at memes, it's important to be looking underneath for all the unexamined assumptions before we take on any meme. This is that time in which we're looking under the hood, under the ideas, the values that we're walking around with. This is an important time. And I show you what's probably familiar to all of you now is the basic graphic that relates to the SDGs. And Gillian mentioned it. She was in the environment as well. I was a part of the 3-year open working group working to establish these goals. We were coming out of the Millennium Development Goals. They were done. So the world was looking at what next. And the only reason I'm bringing this up for you is I want to go underneath a little bit, because you all are going to be looking at the targets and indicators. This was work left incomplete at our time of the working group. We had to literally bring in the statisticians to finish the work of putting the indicators together. You should not see them as the only indicators that are important. It's important to look at what are the actual indicators from the various entry points that we could find ourselves in at the local level. Implementation happens locally. And so what makes real the SDGs are what you find are the metrics that say, yes, we've arrived. We've met this goal. And the entry points are going to differ from community to community. The ones that become important for you may look different than another community in another part of the world. And so this is not complete. We had many more SDGs at one point. We pared down to 17. We had 169 targets originally when we rolled out. And I just say, do not see those as the end-all be-all of indicators, because the big work that's happening now is a big change in how we measure everything. So what we knew then is that big data was coming. So what you want to understand as you're looking at this is that the indicators are really built on old body of statistical knowledge that came out of the 30s. And now what the world body is looking at is how do we bring into measurement real metrics involving the earth itself. And that's work that's underway now. That's work that's accelerating now because of the environment that we're in. So I wanted to point that out. So the way that I like to look at the SDGs, because I was deeply impacted, by the way, by the work of planetary boundaries. Now, I come out of engineering, electrical engineering, and I had worked a long time on energy and bringing energy solutions, energy priorities that were Earth-centric to the G7 and G8. They've changed over the decades. So I like this chart because it allows us to see not only the interrelationship, it allows us to see those SDGs that are particularly pointed at the biosphere, the living space we all live in, and those that relate to societal goals, and those that we could call clearly linked to the economy. And of course, goal 17, which runs through them all, right, is in the connection. Now, privately, and Gillian, I don't know if you were aware of this, but those of us who are working kind of in the day-to-day grind, there's two things we all were consistently aware of, is that these were not meant to be parsed out and one become the flag. They're all related. And the only way this works as a framework is to keep the interrelationship, interconnectedness alive when you look at the SDGs. So I really wanted to hone in on that because I know you're going to be doing good work. And I want to bring that into your thinking. We knew that there was an SDG 0 for us that actually animated and activated that. And it really was around love and joy. So just so you know, on the inside, we had an SDG 0, and now you're on the inside. So how to work with the framework, as I go from community to community and even work with grassroots organizations who are trying to apply the framework in a meaningful way, it's really important to focus on partnerships, which is right there at 17. Allies, linking communities together, the inclusion of voices not present at the table, and opening up funding mechanisms through identifying where your work falls in the SDGs is an important mechanism to open up funding. But this I began talking about in 2015. Today, the world body is considering making the SDGs fundamental to the economic measurement, fundamental to the algorithms underneath finance. And that's huge because today, the economists advising the EU, in large part, have said to the EU that the money debt system is obsolete and that the big fight right now is not around understanding where we are right now, but not translating the finance system fast enough to catch up with where investments need to be. And that is because there are some still trying to reduce the amount of stranded assets that they may be sitting with as they withdraw from the fossil fuel economy. And so when you talk fossil fuel economy, you're talking about pharmaceuticals as well, and much in the way of plastics, of course, and the way food systems operate. So the big work here around the kind of data that's relevant is not only that which is tied to Earth metrics, but it's a clear indication that we can no longer measure the economy by GDP, that we have to move beyond GDP in order to be able to measure progress for people and planet. And right now, that couldn't be, there's no better work to be busy with than looking at what do we need to measure. In the UN process, we have this thing called, of course, the NDCs. I bet you all know about the nationally determined commitments. And we find that important to that process are the shadow reports that are accompanying those national reports. And the shadow reports would be reports that perhaps even students would help municipalities to frame or sovereign nations to frame, that dig in deeper to what's really going in on the ground, on the ground, and what is being and seen by municipalities. And so the idea here is to always look to partner for impact to bring these SDGs alive. And of course, the bias would be toward collaboration. So I want to dig into those 3 slides as the meat to support the work you're doing. Now I'm going to fly, otherwise our time will go, to give you a few other ideas. All right, so when we look at the idea of planetary boundaries, which I was impacted by and took a deep dive in studying the planetary boundaries from the scientists that I was working with, collaborating with during the open working group. And that's where that title of Diplomat of the Biosphere came from, my work at Stockholm Resilience Center on planetary boundaries. And so those 9 boundaries are incorporated into Kate Raworth's model, which we also call the donut model, that the Netherlands has picked up and other countries are looking to pick up as a way of measuring the economy. And that integrates the 9 planetary boundaries. When we look at SDG 12, which is the one I skipped to give an example of one of the targets and metrics that matters and one that speaks directly to local governments and to us, each and every one of us, if you're going to do that climate action survey, it really is around what kind of change is happening at the level of you, me, we. And much of that has to do with what we're consuming and the consumer choices that we're making. What I learned last year in working with one of the largest marketing firms in the world to most of the brands of the world, fossil fuel and otherwise, is that they see the generations that are coming of age now and those following will not have any brand loyalty to current brands. In fact, those brands will be rejected full out. So they have already sent a very strong message to all of their clients that their brands will suffer if they don't move to ensure that the supply chain, from where it's sourced in the ground, through the people that work in that supply chain, if you cannot ensure that there's no harm to planet and to people, that people will not be interested in your brand. And the way that marketing, it's a marketing firm out of the UK, over 3,000 offices around the world. They made a move to step into the UN environment. And in doing so, they removed single-use plastics from every one of those offices around the world to try to send a message to their clients that they were going to reorder and classify those brands that were ready to be an example of what all business would need to be. And that is to move toward no harm metrics. And I say that to emphasize to everyone that this is the time in which those metrics are being watched very carefully as to when actually you're going to push the button on no to brands that cause harm and begin to get behind those industries, whether they're small entrepreneurs or multi-level corporations, multinational corporations. No matter where that might be in the range, how quickly we begin to move in that direction is being not only watched, but forecasted. That's part of the forecasting that's going on. So just another piece to share with you, that this idea around producing and consuming is at the local level an area where much change can be a part of our action plans. And so if we look at 12.8, that in SDG 12 is also relates to the harmony with nature target that was fought for very hard. Every target, every word in the world of the UN, like simply the word youth in the UNFCCC took 5 years for us to get. We didn't get it until Lima. 5 years to get the word youth in the in Article 6 involving education, just to give you a flavor for sometimes where we can get stuck. So getting 12.8 was very important to the work on harmony with nature. Harmony with Nature this year had to cancel its dialogue, but I want you all to consider it important reading, to pull the Secretary General's report on harmony with nature. You can go to the Harmony with Nature website, go to UN Docs. When you get to that page, look for the supplemental report. We had to do an extensive supplemental report and the primary report. And there's a couple of areas to really note is the detail on COVID, the detail on ecological economics as it relates to now, the current moment. And as you look at the report, I want you to notice the capitalization of nature. Nature is capitalized. You will not find that usage yet in the libraries, but it's coming. I did submit the case to Oxford a couple years ago, the same case that allowed the UN to begin capitalizing nature. It was in the English language, and we fell out of use of capitalizing nature in the industrial era. And a point of activism, or climate action, would be to begin capitalizing nature again. And perhaps there's other language to look at, because language will change as our values change and as our action and behavior changes. We will use language different to communicate our values. So the ecological economics for planetary health and human well-being is section 2, right into the early pages. I think it's important to get in there and read that data. Also the COVID pieces. The IUCN report is going to have a special analysis on that coming up. And that's going to be, you can find what we have learned so far on the links between COVID, the pandemic, climate change, and of course, biodiversity loss, because those are linked. So we've been pulling that data together. Here's a quick look at the 9 planetary boundaries, which address the safe operating space of the planet. And I just say that this is why metrics matters. I think what's coming fast upon us is the idea of linking the well-being of planet to the health of people. And it's not just about people, it's about life. But if we look at our dashboard, if you were to look at just a quick assessment of your basic metabolic health, which, by the way, the data now says that 77% of the population is metabolically unwell in the United States. Blood pH, oxygen, hydration, blood pressure, temperature, your pulse, blood sugar, heart-brain activity, right? Heart rate, that should be. Those are the kinds of things, the first flush would be an indication of, your own, are you in that safe range? Well, the planet has that as well. And the 9 planetary boundaries essentially point to that. And I can tell you out of all 9, and by the way, we are an overshoot in 2 areas: biosphere integrity, biogeochemical flows, which involve phosphorus and nitrogen. But the most out of all the boundaries, most regenerative, and the one that's fastest to recover, every one of you have witnessed now that we've been in COVID, and that is the reports around the world of how quickly the waterways cleared. Thus, once the waterways cleared, what did we see? The atmosphere clear. And that makes sense because essentially every watershed is all the way up to the atmosphere. And look how quickly we saw clearing. So when you look at fresh waters and we turn our attention to fresh waters, that's an important area for us to work on as humans in order to have the greatest impact, cleaning up the waters. So I guess it was by the time we had come out of 2015, we had the reports on planetary boundaries. There was some global work that we were getting busy on. And that was looking at the impact any place where there was a risk that measured 10% of the world's population that we were going to zero in on. And these risk areas were laid out. Of course, natural risk is where you would see pandemics. And we got busy working on identifying those areas. One was the seafood industry, and there were others. But all of this is now magnified in a COVID world, including population. But one thing that planetary boundaries is very clear about, that if we were sharing and distributing in the world, the population wasn't a deal. The problem, more so than population, was affluence, the wealthy nations overusing and going after what was called the resources of the planet, going elsewhere to meet their demands around consumption. That was a bigger problem, affluence. And so here we are with new plan to, in the face, of course, this critical period we're in with the COVID pandemic, looking at how all of those crises now converging are being met with the pandemic, which we've always seen on the horizon. And of course, now it's here. It amplifies all of the other crises, as you can imagine, and as we are living through. And so the world body, many of us have been working on what are those primary instabilities that we need to work to stabilize. And here is our list. And I wanted to be sure you all had it because there are no answers at the moment. We're all together looking, thinking together on how we move forward. It's an absolute opportunity in front of us in the face of now having the pandemic well rooted in our reality right now. And so this is where some good work is needed. And I just wanted to, I can't dive into any of these, but I wanted you to have it in this discussion. So the human opportunities are around what came out of the great work of the scientists was saying, You know where the biggest change is going to come from? The tipping point and the regime shift that needs to occur is in the societal realm. That's the sphere where we need to see the tipping points, where we need to see the greatest shift. I have seen it as us working out a whole new social contract is what's necessary. So my work is driving behind that, and driving behind that new social construct that is inclusive and has regard for all life, a no harm perspective that is driving toward harmony with nature. And so it's very clear that the convergence of the crisis is driving us toward that tipping point. It's driving us faster toward it because the norms have been dissolving. So the dissolution of the norms, what it really does, if you want to look at the opportunity, is it begins to make space for us to stand with our values, with a connection to the earth if we feel it, and to make bold moves. It gives room for bold ideas to stand. When things are working, when old norms are working, it's tough to bring in those kind of ideas. But we're seeing it on the global stage. We're seeing things we thought in January we still would be several years out from seeing, that they have accelerated, and I'll tell you about some of those. So these human movements that are involved with the social contract are numerous. Of course, this slide is a smidgen, but the human movements are the fuel behind what will bring about the change, as well as our remembering that the change has been felt by many peoples around the world for a very long time. Where some are just feeling it, it's been felt by communities around the globe for a very long time. And they sit on the libraries of the world that we have still not read, yet we're destroying. Every forest is a rich library of information. And I think our great fortune is to still have some elders with us. It's an all hands on deck moment. I think it's an intergenerational moment. Everyone needs to be involved and listening to the earth. And there are people walking on the planet who have been, that's their way, their worldview and their way of walking in the world is around listening to the earth and to the cosmos for insight, for guidance, for the way that they shape their lives. And it's important to turn to that. I have a story to share with you from my home in Carmel, the Monterey Bay, California. My watershed is the Carmel River, and the native people who are indigenous to that land, who those were their sovereign lands, are the Esselen Indians. And in October, because of a PhD dissertation that was done in 2010, October of 2019, the Esselen people recovered some of those lands near Big Sur. Their ancestral lands have been returned with money to build them, and they will not be involved in tourism to those lands. But that's an example of what the power of a dissertation can do. This dissertation is over 500 pages long. I point you to that as an idea of impact of your work. A surprise was in the recent party platform on climate change. The Democratic Party leapt to include in their recommendation to the larger committee the establishment of a panel that would, a commission that would look at sustainable development to explore incorporating rights of nature principles into US law. Unprecedented. The snickers and sneers about earth law, earth jurisprudence at these levels just 6 months ago. And a bold move by committee writing to bring about this idea, just bringing the idea formally into committee as a recommendation, by a committee tasked to do that was big. Will it be in the platform? Probably not. But do we have a chance to see something like that in the future if we want? Yes. Bold. This is what I mean. Disruption of norms, room for the big ideas that take us where we need to go. Planetary Emergency 1.0, we delivered to the UN body in meetings last September at the UN. The nature-based solutions is one of those steps in between. I see it more as the business response to the fact that we need to be Earth-centric in our policy. And many NGOs came on board and nations to support the idea of a planetary emergency. We now have a 2.0 on that. I hope that you will read it as well to see if there's anything of merit that you would want to back and support, because your support is important. See if those are ideas you can wrestle with. The SDGs are fundamental underneath this planetary emergency 2.0. In that, the case for a planetary emergency plan is really getting around three things: the climate, people, and nature, and driving toward the global commons, a protection of the global commons. We have sort of 10 essential transformative ideas that are being driven. And as a result of driving toward that, we've been negotiating and lead up to the biodiversity meeting, a leader letter from nation states for nature. And how that works is you come up with the idea and then you start reaching out to nation states to see if they'll sign the letter. And we've been in that process. And before coming to you, I mentioned that there have been news breaking. The EU came out of a meeting with approval to sign the letter, and I received that, so I'm pulling it up right now. To give you what the date was, I have to kind of push back here. It was 12:26 in the afternoon today. This was Eastern Standard Time, so not that long ago, that the Council today authorized the Commission to endorse on behalf of the EU the Leaders' Pledge to Nature in order to send a unified signal to step up global ambition for biodiversity. The Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is thereby authorized to endorse that pledge at a UN event to be held virtually on the 28th of September. And this is in advance of the UN Summit on Biodiversity. So up to that point, I think last week we were at midpoint, we had 28 nations. China has come aboard and made a strong statement as well to increase ambition. And we're looking good, folks, on that. But that's what the work involves. And taking action on that, a letter like that, I can't share the details. The letter's under embargo until the 28th. But I want you to make it your business to find out when the embargo is lifted on the letter, where you stand. Because I think it's important in the process that nation states are doing their part and cohorts such as the EU. But everything is going to happen when we decide as people to take those ideas on board. That's where real change occurs. So I want you to grab this document, look for the global commons and public goods pieces that are suggested, the 10 urgent actions for transformation that we're suggesting. I have, because of fresh waters being the most regenerative, the most powerful place we can put our energy to recover the atmosphere and the biosphere itself, and a way of activating the global commons on my end and creating and enabling an environment for people to lead in where we go. I've organized a freshwater summit. You're all welcome to learn more about that summit and how you can participate. This is an honoring of the great rivers Mississippi and Missouri. It's designed to activate a recognition of all the freshwaters around the globe. Freshwaters, unlike the 71% of water that covers the planet, fresh waters represent 2.5% of total water. And all but 8% of that is the water that flows. Of the 2.5%, most of it's caught up in the glacier and the ice cap, leaving less than 1% that you and I and all of the semi-aquatic and land-based life depend on. And we don't walk on the planet as if that matters. And so the big shift, the big potential in human opportunity that I see is addressing these waterways and these great rivers and reconnecting with them and making that decision in our behavior, in our action, that is linked to the watersheds we live in and the waterways we affront. So all 124 riparian communities up and down the Mississippi are a part of this work. And part of the tipping points, I believe, coming is that we really are going to move beyond nation states. We begin to measure the earth. The consensus is, and I lead in this, is that we will look at the world bioregionally. We will look at what do we need to care for of the earth and the systems of the earth in order to live in harmony here. So the freshwater biome being, without me going into too much of that, is again one of the fastest way to recover the biosphere itself. If you go to the same UN report, Secretary General's report on harmony with nature, go to section 85, you will see the Global Freshwater Summit listed. That's because all of the outcome documents, the reports, whether they're ethnographies or rapporteur reports or the status of river report that we will be giving, all of those reports will be housed at the United Nations Harmony with Nature Program site as outcome documents, as well as UNESCO Man and Biosphere. So I am encouraging anyone who has an interest in waters to get on board. Also, we're calling for an Earth Assembly. Why? The UN body doesn't make or enforce any decisions, but it is a convening space for nations, and one day I hope also a people's assembly to think about and deliberate those things we must work on together in terms of the planetary well-being. And an Earth Assembly is long overdue. There's a conversation going on in the North, the global North, and a conversation in the global South that needs to be brought together into the same room. In the global North, there's a lot of conversation going on about ecological resource economy approaches. And in the global South, rights of nature is going wild. And so those two conversations need to come together and more. We would hope an Earth Assembly, if the UNGA adopts that, will be able to look at non-anthropocentric or Earth-centered paradigmatic approaches to multilateralism. Does that sound something that would be interesting to you? Then I would suggest that that be part of your climate action. All right, so I don't know where I am on time. I said I was going to watch it, but I get lost. We also have produced for this time of the UNGA through the Nature Hub. If you want to see where some of the activities are tomorrow and the day after, the Nature Hub will be available with many, many conversations. We have created this Imagine for 1 minute video that goes very, very fast. You will see the Pope is involved, even Greta is involved, and many, many others. It goes very, very fast. But we are asking all leaders before they go into their meetings to think about the earth before they go in to their negotiations. We've always had a moment of silence at the UN, but we really want them to make the connection to the earth, to listen to the earth. And I invite you all to consider doing similarly. That if we're going to be able to think well and make good decisions, we need to be considering again the basic well-being of the earth. if we are going to have lives to thrive well together in and on our planetary world that we create, because the mesocosm is what we create, what we together decide to create in terms of our systems, our structures, our institutions. It's important that we think about that being in some measure, right, in collaboration with the planet itself. So we have a lot to learn from the planet. We're encouraging that. On October 10th, you might also find that we're launching a big effort with TEDx to just get towns everywhere busy talking about these metrics, talking about Earth-centered approaches. And that big launch, you can read about also where you go to the planetary emergency. See if there's ideas there that might inform the things that you're considering together as you work across various institutions on these important topics. I'm very excited about the work you're doing. I want to thank you for having me here today. Turning it back over to you, Gillian. Sarah.
Wow, that was a great talk, and there's been a lot of questions that are popping around in the chat box, and I hope Sarah's following Twitter and Slack. So we have several different ways. So we'll make sure the students all have time. This is a good point to start putting some questions in the chat box so we can ask some different questions. I will start on the top, but again, remember, please use Twitter hashtag Yay2020 SDGs so we can also capture those questions. But the first question is from Emily Fox. And Emily, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? You'll have to unmute yourself because I think we muted everybody.
Sure. My question was about the chart that you displayed early in your talk about the tending the joy as kind of the base of the biosphere as SDG 0. And I was wondering if you have any targets for that SDG, or if it's just a touchstone or like a concept you want to translate throughout the SDGs.
Question. Okay, well, Fox, we're old friends. Thank you for that question. You know, it really was an energy that was felt between us. But recently, that question has come up. What if we did have metrics underneath that? I would love to see someone put that together, because we're really serious, and I mean serious, that we have, for those of us who have been working in that vein with the SDGs as a framework, we have been threatening to put an SDG 0 committee together. And I would say that one of the things to think about in terms of joy, a metric that I have added that I want to throw out for all of you, is part of the capacity to feel joy is to be grounded and connected in something larger than yourself, for one, and to also be able to have the strength, stamina, and resilience to live with grief, to be with those things that you haven't considered, that challenge you, to also be able to remain optimistic and to see the beauty and proportion of the earth as something that also is a part of you. To see that whatever those mechanisms and forces are that undergird life, that they too are a part of you, that there's an innate, and this gives joy, right? Joy rises fast when you think about this. We are wired to evolve well with this planet. The planet does everything it can to maintain a life support system for all that live here. We can find joy in collaborating and working with nature to participate in that vital system of aliveness and vibrancy. So when we get going in it, we don't go in the direction of what some people will say is, you know, as joy is just, yes, it's ebullient, but really when we deepen in joy, we find our stamina to be able to live with the times that we're in peril, the times when we have loss. That deep well that we build is also gives us the great distance that we can travel to joy. Ecstasy happens to be a combination of some of the most challenging times we can live through and the highest. There we often meet ecstasy. So really, deep joy is being able to be fully human. Our humanity gives us the ability to have a wide range of emotion and to be able to witness ourselves and not get lost when we're feeling some of the heavier emotions of human existence, but yet to be able to know that those times pass, and as they pass and we've lived through it, we're stronger. So I'm sure you didn't expect that, but you asked. I'm giving you my current feeling and thinking. We're all evolving together, and tending the joy is going to be a part of a recipe of resilience. It isn't easy work to sit in these meetings and see countries deny the obvious. So our joy has been a handle for many of us who have stayed in the work.
Thank you. It's a beautiful answer.
Yes, thank you so much for that. We have a couple other questions. Just remind people as you ask your questions, if you don't mind just saying which institution you are from. So Ursula, you're up.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ursula. I am from La Molina in Peru. And my question is about the economical development. So I've read in the SDG 8 that claims that there should be a aggregate global GDP growth of 3% per year. And I've been also reading in another reports that say that this is not achievable if we want to have like a sustainable decoupling with resources, which at the end will impact in the environment. So how is this related to the donut economy that you mentioned?
Oh, yes, very much so. I think that that whole set of metrics would challenge the idea of growth in the way that it's been defined. You see, GDP, really, the reason that it's obsolete now is it also has built in it a zero-sum game. It requires losers. You're leveraging money in which you create an indebtedness, and some people will not be able to pay, and you gamble on that. That's number one. GDP uses cash. That's why war in terms of development, if you look at it in terms of GDP, war is good. Well, how many of you feel that war is beneficial to the planet or to people? Where we see ecocide, the destruction of ecosystems, we see genocide. The co-violations are documented. Whose balance sheet should show that as profitable or as a form of development? What do you think is going on when civil unrest is stirred up in any country? From a GDP perspective, there's some folks making money on that. So we can't continue to measure our world that way because the harm of the planet is not measured in those metrics at all. Even when we say sustainable development, if you marry that and couple that with the idea of GDP, it's a miss. So my sense is as we get through this process, not only will we be redefining, you and I together, what we believe growth is, and the kind of growth that we wish to have, because I do feel there's a lot of work. Once we decide we're going to work to clean up our mess, there's a lot of work there. And if we have the metrics in place, like the donut model, we can quantify that as the kind of metrics that make sense in the economy. But we have to change the metrics that underlie the economy and that underlie finance. This is early work. This is where the work gets bold, because what's been happening is that people have been trying to find the mechanism within the old paradigm. But if we say today the old paradigm is done, then we get unconstrained and freed up from those reference points in that matrix, and we look at it all anew. And if you're really interested in this area, then I would guide you to look at, in your community, what would be the measure of quality life that includes human, wildlife, planet? What would that look like? How would you measure that? We need to learn how to measure thriving, not surviving. So the ecological folks are looking at this. I think we also see signs of this in permaculture, don't you think? If you're familiar with the concepts underlying regenerative farming or permaculture, we also have those kinds of metrics. I think we can pull from many systems that are in place to find an economics that will make sense. The donut is one idea.
Okay,
Yeah?
thank you.
You're welcome.
So next up we have Zach. We'll follow Zach by Sarah W. and then Sarah G. And certainly encourage the student to please post some more questions in the chat so we can ask our amazing speaker on some new perspectives. So Zach, you're up.
Awesome. Hi, Myra. Yeah, so I guess my first question, I have a few, but
remember to introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, Zach. Again, I'm the fellow from one of the fellows from Colorado College, and so kind of relating into what you just talked about with GDP and how that isn't conducive to like the way that we think. How can we like reimagine alternate supply chains that don't exploit people and place?
You know, one of the ones I love, I did a talk a couple years ago now, I think it was 2018. 2018, it was the fashion industry, right? Really doing serious work, and they need to, because who's the second polluter in the world? The clothing industry, fashion. Those t-shirts that we make and we use as fundraisers, each t-shirt uses the amount of water you, Zach, would drink in 2 years. So there's a movement underway within the fashion industry, largely being spearheaded in Europe right now among young designers, to really get down to, let's, create quality fashion and ways of it moving around so that we don't have but a few items that we care for. That's one idea. And that we ensure, perhaps through blockchain, because blockchain has the ability to track from the inception point of the supply chain all the way to the user buyer, where that has been, and have it tagged so that you can make a choice about that. But really what's being driven is to bring it so local that you can see the scale of impact around certain consumer items. So if we end up in a world where we begin to really stand in the earth, recognizing, hey, those that have come before us and the contributions they've made, the watershed that we see and receive water from every day, and we could speak on any day of the week, the health and well-being of that water. We've first of all now just gone a long way for setting up the conditions for having a world that goes well beyond GDP. Just like Bhutan decided that they would not participate in GDP, the UN issued a resolution for all countries to begin looking at measuring beyond GDP, whether it's GNH, looking at gross national happiness, or any other metric, that you're taking into account wellness, well-being in general in everything that you're doing. So I'll leave it there because it's a lot similar to what I shared with Ursula in that thinking on GDP. And I know how bright you are. You probably could come back with a few of your own ideas.
Thanks, Myra.
What is your other question? Did you have another?
I can come back after a few other people have gotten a
Okay.
chance to ask a question.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Zach. I'm going to actually skip over Sarah W. and go to Sarah, skip over Sarah G as well and go to Emily. And then Carmen, did you have a comment on the last question? Did you want to share first?
Oh, no, I was just commenting on like the fashion industry.
Okay, thanks for that, Carmen. Emily, you're up next and make sure to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm at Colorado State University. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's phenomenal. So my question is, how can we tie current events in the social justice field, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, to the SDGs and promoting sustainability in an equitable way?
Completely linked. Completely linked. At the end of the day, when you look at, again, what we're looking at is people, nature, climate, as you know, in those rough, if we were to just assign buckets, and we have, as to where we need to aim. The social contract and the tipping point is going to happen when we recreate a new social contract. What we have had is an inequitable world, not designed for inclusion. And it didn't include the earth. The big shift is recognizing that that omission in the current construct is something that we are all participating in addressing because we must. And as we do that, we just get to look around at how we have not followed really the Earth's example. When you look at the Earth, its body gives. It's a giving, its nature is giving. It manages to distribute what's needed to all life, including us. We're the ones that must mature and grow up to figure out that that example is the way of complex systems. We are complex, and we are in a complex world. And the world works when we learn how to distribute. And we learn how to take only what we need. There is no need to hoard. The sun comes up and shines every day, and it starts photosynthesis every day through its rays shining. And that falls on all life, as does the rain, as does the water. Our problem has been, our challenge has been, is that we have not felt it necessary to learn how to distribute. Why we're hoarding? I look at all the storage facilities we have, and it looks a little insane what we're doing. There are t-shirts in the global south that have been thrown out from the north that are sitting in landfills. It does not make sense what we're doing. So when we get the sense of that which we're really a part of, and that, boy, life can really look good here, I think we'll get busy with the change. But that is going to take including everybody. So this movement, I tell you, the first thing to look for is inclusion. So that as we look together, we're measuring what we need to measure so that we can be sure our impacts will have a just landing. in every stratosphere of our activity? Thank you for that question, but it's crucial. Must be built in.
Thank you, Emily. Great question. And just a minor advertisement on the side, an amazing book is coming out this next month called Unsustainable Inequalities, written by a French economics who's also at Rio Plus 20, but to talk about the problem of decoupling our equity from sustainable development, that you cannot achieve one without the other, and that we need to pay attention to social equity because we cannot be sustainable without social equity.
Must.
It's a nice short book. Sarah just posted it in the chat box. Sarah G, you had a comment or a question on engineering schools and students. Please, we have a little bit more time for questions, so please shoot some in the chat box.
Hi, I was just about to write in the chat box that Michigan Tech students should be asking questions. Hello, I know you're there. I can see you.
All right, you tech students, come on, you can do this.
Okay. I see Vina, ask a question. Please introduce yourself. We might have to call out in the CSU students next.
So hi, I'm Veena. I'm a PhD student auditing Dr. Green's class at Michigan Tech. But I'm sort of an odd person to be asking because I'm not an engineer. I am in the humanities at Michigan Tech, which is a minority pretty much in this community. So my question relates to my field, and I'm trying to tie it back to Goal 4 from the SDGs, which is quality education.
Yeah.
And I find that there's obviously a lot of historical gap in the understandings of environmental exploitation that has led up to climate change, whether it's capitalistic systems or colonization. So how do we imagine institutionally pushing or even influencing, to be subtle, I guess, national education systems to push for education that allows that kind of reckoning with history? Because it feels like that gap is what multiplies the racial systemic injustices, and people don't even recognize the criticality of understanding those systems better before or in order to address environmental crises. So that's my question.
Yes, you know, there was a time in which one would say, kind of throw it out, maybe it was a little irresponsible, but it really did happen in the highest of places, where they would say, look, the dinosaurs just have to die. Because campus life, academic institutions, and I have worked in them, I have taught in all of the Ivy Leagues. And you know what I was teaching? Emotional intelligence. And mostly med students and scientists, Nobel laureate track scientists. And I'll tell you that, number one, science is still being taught in a Newtonian way in many of these organizations, many of these institutions. And that's part of what many of us are waiting to see the change in. And academic institutions, because what we call the brilliant ones, they bring the money into the institutions. Often behavior and ways of being are dismissed. And I'm just saying that that's the real deal. And what I saw often was a system that was like a boot camp. And of course, I came up through one of those, and then I worked in them helping postdocs and others who their own work could not go forward unless a prof, of course, approved it. Their PI approved the work. And often PIs would hold to work that supported their own body of work. This is an important part of how money flows. Well, this is the same challenge in the world right now, is that money flows according to this bias. And I feel that there is a great opportunity in this system that really tries to to be free of influence. Academic institutions have fought to be free from these influences, and I think it's time to reclaim the ground and the integrity of this kind of study, because it's been fought for over the years. Real PhD studies that were under apprenticeship, you had to really work to do self-study, following the clues, not those things that were spoon-fed to you, not just regurgitating things already written, already read, but really going out on the limb to identify the frontiers of learning and putting it to the test. So I feel that's another place of opportunity. And I believe everyone who has been attracted to real study of that kind will be excited to be a part of an institution like that. But we must let the money flow to support it. We can't let money into institutions come through those that want to see their own legacies lifted up and sustained. We must have freedom to go beyond prior thinking. We must always be challenging prior thinking, and that must be okay. Literally, these were patron systems, right? And the reason a patron was taken to take someone who wanted to study in depth was so that they would have the freedom to do it. So some of the good and the bad has come from the patron system within a paradigm that is now dying. So we have seen some of the best and some of the worst in institutions, and I would say this is work within institutions to out, because there's a strong decolonization effort underway everywhere. And so to be able to look and to see and to tease out where colonization has really kept you from studying openly the subjects that need to be studied is an important thing to bring forward in every institution now. And I do feel that there would be more support for it than lack of it. But it will go up against how the institution is financed, and you have to be ready for that.
I just think COVID has thrown us off a little bit in the humanities and liberal arts to pursue those projects, to make them, due to lack of other terminology, profitable, or at least in the university scheme of things, something that seems worthwhile. And that's always a battle, I think, on a macro level at every single institution. So thanks for your response. It's really hopeful. There's hope in there. Thank you.
I think we go to our roots as academics.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, just for our closeout, we'll have Sarah. And I'd ask Mike if you could stop sharing your screen for a second. Sarah,
Yeah.
you're next.
Which Sarah?
Sarah Whipple, I think. Okay, so thank you, Myra. My name is Sarah. I'm from Colorado State University. And my question was around your comment about how it was like tough to get the youth incorporated into the targets to begin with, and was wondering if you think that like the recent uproar from youth, you talked about, you mentioned Greta, for instance, but like the Fridays for Our Future and those types of movements, if that would have changed the perception of youth towards climate action, if this conversation was happening at a more current level.
Yes, that ended up being just one of those dominoes. Once youth got into UNFCCC, UNFCCC was up and running in a new way. The UNGO, all of a sudden, you wouldn't do anything without youth, and youth went right to the top of the priority groups that would be in every room. So that's been accomplished. Now that it has, what I'm really interested in is seeing more of the universities that become NGOs, literally become NGOs, because there's status for you to do that, and to exercise, to fully use that voice, and use that voice to open up for inclusion, because we've got to accomplish what was part of the original plan for the UN, and that was to have a people's assembly, so that there is a mechanism beyond just the nation state that weighs in on decisions that are made. And that's an important role that youth can play, and that they do see that's in their gaze. A lot of good work with the Secretary General has been done this year on UN 75. And what the pushback is don't just give us marginal tasks to observe. We really need to find ways of incorporating youth voices into the negotiation space. And that is going to be part of new governance structures, I believe, that need to come into the UN framework. And we're not there yet. But imagine an Earth Assembly, if the UN takes on its role of being a convener of important dialogues. Imagine there being an Earth Assembly that happens where we have bioregional representation, where we give Earth a seat, like the Amazon, like the Mississippi River, that we have a whole group that will speak to its status and what it needs to be a thriving ecosystem or thriving biome. Imagine having an assembly on those terms. I think those are the kinds of things we'll need to see. And those are the kinds of things all of you can champion. I've shown you one example of a dissertation that has literally allowed the Esselen Nation to reclaim their lands. There's power in this moment that you each have. Get underneath these assumptions and get some good work under your belt and out into the world. This is the time. Thank you, Sarah, for that question.
Well, thank you again, Myra. And I'm going to ask if everyone, if you're able to, if you wouldn't mind turning on your video screen so we can give a Zoom clap to our guest lecturer for today, Myra. So thank you for joining us. And for those, that are in this class, we look forward to seeing you next week. Look forward to seeing conversation on Slack. And if you have any questions as a follow-up to Myra, I'm sure she would love to see them through her Twitter. Her Twitter is at Arithmetric. So feel free to tweet away, or you can send those questions to your professor at your institution, and we can make sure that Myra gets those so that she can hopefully provide a response. So thank you again, and hope everyone stays well and safe, and we'll talk soon.